Good evening and welcome to the 2023 ICQCM Grant Writing Summit. Yeah. I'm Ezekiel Dixon-Roman, one of the PIs and directors of the Institute in Critical Quantitative and Computational and Mixed Methodologies. This summit is supported by a grant from the National Science Foundation and the William T. Grant Foundation. It is my honor to welcome you all to this summit that is designed to be a hands-on grant writing workshop and experience. ICQCM's seeds of thought began years ago when the PIs recognized, while serving on various grant proposal review committees, that there was such a dearth of grant proposals from scholars of color employing quantitative or even mixed methods. We especially noticed this with the AERA Minority Fellowship Committee, or program, I should say. We also noted that the discourse of power continues to be overdetermined by quantitative methods and even materialized in which projects were selected for funding, a majority of which were in fact quantitative, despite being the minority in number. Thus, one of the goals of ICQCM has been to increase the number of grant proposals and fellowship applications proposing critical approaches to quantitative, computational, and mixed methodologies. Hence, in addition to the previous few years of critical methods training that we have excitedly and enjoyedly, that's not even a word, provided. Right, we're gonna make it. We also have designed the summit to be a constructive and formative opportunity to learn more about insights and techniques to tightening grant proposals, and for each of you to work on doing that through small group hands-on workshops. I'm gonna reconfigure here a bit so I can see what I'm actually trying to read here. Thus, the goal of this summit is for each of you to complete this summit with significant work toward developing and tightening your respective grant proposals or fellowship applications to enhance their competitiveness and likelihood of being funded, of being awarded. In order to underscore how important this is, let me take a moment to share something that I was recently reminded of. In a recent email exchange with ICQCM Advisory Board member Rochelle Michel regarding this specific summit on grant writing, she reminded me that when we were in the Fordham Psychometrics PhD program, that we never had one course, not a course, that focused on or even touched on the grant proposal development and fundraising process. She even shared that she participated in an AERA pre-conference workshop that was to include, it advertised, it literally specified that it was going to include grant proposal development. Yet, when she went to the workshop, the instructor said that they decided to eliminate, to take that off due to time, since that is something, that being grant proposal development, is something you should get from your PhD programs. So you can't get it in the pre-workshop, you're not getting it in your program either. Where are you supposed to get it? Thus, we both left our PhD program not being trained on the full process of grant proposal development and fundraising. This is something we both have had to learn through experience, and I would imagine many other people in the room in a similar boat as well. Let alone learn its importance as well. So if you think about it, if it's included in the curriculum, if it's included in the training, there's a certain degree of value and importance that's being placed on it. If you're being told, if it's not included in the curriculum, and it's literally an implicit process, an apprenticeship process, then that means not only is it understood to not be valued in general, but that certain folk are going to get it through the apprenticeship process as they're working with certain scholars. This is something we both have, so although all research does not need to be funded, and I do want to underscore this point, we recognize that all research does not need to be funded. It is most certainly the case that there is crucially important research that must be funded in order to be done, and especially going after critical critical questions that are going after critiquing structural racism, oppression, discrimination, and the like. The work that we seek to do in ICQCM. The politics of research includes what and whose research is funded and toward what ends. As my colleague Ebony McGee has said, the revolution must be funded too. Thus, this grant writing summit is not just about scholarly development. This shit is political. And we need your work, every last one of you. We need all of your work to not just get supported, but also getting out there, pushing the discourse, pushing the political discourse. And we know what's at stake, given, I don't even need to say it. We know what's at stake. Georgia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, that's right. With all this in mind, we have designed this summit to have 3 components. The first component is panel discussions on each of the 4 primary areas of grant proposal and fellowship applications. These include 1, a breakfast panel on motivating or how to motivate research questions. 2, a lunch panel on broader impacts. This is specifically for the NSF context, broader impacts, as well as critical theoretical conceptualizations. 3, an afternoon panel on study design and critical methods. So how to go about doing critical methods and actually literally drawing that thread through from the question to the conceptualization to the methods themselves to the design itself. And then 4th, a breakfast panel on intellectual merit / scholarly contribution. Arguably, each of these have equal weight and importance. This last one, I actually want to say, really gets at the so what question, the what's politically at stake in the work that we do. And how compellingly we answer and engage that question becomes so much about how important, how well we articulate how important the work is. In addition, as a way to feature scholars recently awarded grants and to learn from their successful insights, we will have a panel conversation with the ICQCM PIs, Brian McGowan, Charity Clay, and David Rangel. Given that I also think of both Ebony and Otis as the NSF gurus, I was also keen to make this a conversation for us to learn from both of them as well. The second component are the small group workshops. We have divided you all into 5 small groups that you should have already seen via the shared drive that was sent to each of you in a previous email. Each of these small groups will be led by assigned institute fellows. The small groups will be conducted as mock NSF review panels, where there will be an assigned primary reviewer and 2 secondary reviewers for each proposal. This is where the real work, if you will, the hands-on work will occur, as in addition to the panel reviews of each of your submitted proposals, there will be time for you all to work on those revisions, work on developing your proposals further, and interact with the expertise within your small groups and within the community here to gain greater insights and even hone and tighten your proposals even further. Important to note, we know some of you have submitted proposals within the past few days or are still working on your proposals, and that's okay. We want to make sure that in each group, once the panel reviews are completed, we are encouraging all of you to use the small group workshop time to write, revise, ask questions, and use this time as an opportunity to further develop your grant proposals and fellowship applications. This includes each of you that have recently submitted and are still working on developing your proposals. Excuse me. The third component are 30-minute breaks, where you all are encouraged to have follow-up conversations from your small group workshopping, meet one-on-one with an institute fellow, and or engage in networking opportunities with other scholars. We're imagining that, in fact, you might learn about work that's going on that might be related to your own work. Or you might learn about, in fact, someone else who could potentially be a great collaborator on your own work. So having these 30-minute breaks, we're hoping will enable the opportunities for further facilitation and engagement and cultivation of those potential developed collaborations. And of course, during those breaks, there will be coffee, tea, and snacks will be available. Let me stop here for a moment and see, are there any questions on the design, if you will, the unfolding, if you will, of the next couple of days? One thing I will say is that during this welcome dinner, during the program, if there are questions, you will need to come up to the mic up here to ask questions, okay? We do have 2 cameras that are videoing, so. Moment, was there?
I can ask you after.
Okay, all right, okay. At this time, Otis is gonna join us and
welcome. Good afternoon, all that good stuff. It's so great to see the ICQCM family here. This is, the moment for us all to kind of unwind and also, put those things that are home, that are at your other institutions, they'll be there, right? But we're here in family and community, and also for social transformation. So very happy to be a part of that. I just have a couple of observations here. One, I want to suggest that what we're doing is actually working. In 2016, around that time, I ended up being a technical advisor for HBCUs for NSF. Actually, it wasn't just HBCUs, it was TCUs, HSIs, MSIs, and I think I met with teams from definitely over 100 teams, maybe even close to 200 teams within that 2-year period to actually strengthen the methods section of their proposals. And through that model, there was no difference in the number of awards that were made by NSF to minoritized institutions. So I wasn't really happy about that. So that was also another reason why Ebony, myself, and Ezekiel decided that, there needs to be a change. So we ended up asking many of you to fill out a survey in 2021. I believe it was February 2021. No, it's 2022, right. February 2022, about your grant experiences. And 56% of you reported not ever having received an external award. So in 2023, we fielded another survey, and we found some very promising results. We had 8 NSF award winners. We had 5 William T. Grant Foundation winners, 3 from the Spencer Foundation and 1 from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation of our scholars. So, yeah. So if we were to just use the people who completed the survey as the denominator here, it would be a pretty high 44%. But we decided, hey, let's put in the fact that maybe some people who were awarded are more motivated to actually fill out the survey. So if we just were to use all of the ICQCM scholars, that still is a respectable 35.4% grant receipt rate. So I just once again want to say it's not about myself, Ebony, or Ezekiel, what we're doing. It's you. You are leading the change we need to see. And so I hope this time together will continue that progress. On that note, I have a few announcements about other notable accomplishments. Ezekiel, and I have to pull this up to get all of his new titles, right? So our own Ezekiel Dixon Roman is now professor of, yes, professor of critical race, media, and educational studies, and director of the Edmund W. Gordon Institute for Urban and Minority Education at Columbia University. So, I am a spirit-forward person. And I'm giving it to you now because I know you can't take it on the plane. I love you. You know that? And so my next kudos goes to Ebony O. McGee. Yes, isn't she? Yes! So Ebony is making a move as well. And yes, I know it's seismic, right? But she will be the next Bloomberg Distinguished Professor at Johns Hopkins University. Ebony, come on up. Yeah. So before we continue, we all know that Javon does, he works hard, and he'll be taken care of as usual, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Javon for all of the work that he's done. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to leave the podium and turn it over to Ebony McGee.
Otis is such a sweetheart. Can we give it up to him? Because I really don't think I'd be at Johns Hopkins without him. So we have to give him the credit. So I have the great honor tonight to do the introductions. And we don't have one keynote. We're so bad. We have two. That's how fly we are. But I first want to just say, we have some special visitors who are now part of the ICQCM family. So if you see some new faces that you haven't seen before, please welcome them. They are with us. Where are you? Can you just raise your hand? Yes, I see Monica, Richard. Yes, I see you. So this is our new family. So let's welcome them into the family. Thank you. We are so glad you're here. And although it's necessary to focus on grant writing, we also want to say we understand that this is a capitalistic venture that is marketed as meritocratic, neutral, innocent, I love this one, non-political, right? And we just want to say that you are brilliant if you never win $1 in your life. Your work is wonderful and you deserve to be here. I think that's really, really important to say. Thank you. And let's be clear, I take money from bad people all the time. So don't be afraid to take money and laundry it for good. But we need to also understand that part of this grant thing, institutions have caught on, and they're now asking us to sort of pay our own salaries through these grants. So let's just understand the corporatization that's going on, right, while we get the revenue for the revolution. So I just wanted to say that, and to say that's something that we are also thinking about and mindful of as well. So this evening, one of the privileges of doing this summit here in Atlanta is to be in the proximity of the Atlanta University Center and its data science initiative. As the initiative has a very similar mission to ICQCM, the AUC Data Science Initiative works to develop promising practices that diversify the data science workforce and advance data science on topics that impact Black America and other minoritized folks. Thus, when we decided on Atlanta for the summit, we also decided that we should have 2 incredible scholars from the ACU Data Science Initiative to join us. Dr. Talithia Washington, who is just thebomb.com. Can we say this? Can we say this? This is just a snippet of all the things that she does. I owe you a drink. She is the inaugural director of the Atlanta University Center Data Science Initiative, a professor of mathematics at Clark Atlanta University, and affiliate faculty at Morehouse College, Morehouse School of Medicine, and Spelman College. She is the director and principal investigator of the NSF-funded National Data Science Alliance and the president of the Association for Women in Mathematics. Yes, you can clap now. You can clap now. I just got one more sentence. She works across historically Black colleges, HBCUs, Aggie Pride, anybody? Okay. I'll represent. To increase the number of Blacks with expertise in data science and expand data science research that advocates for social and racial justice. She is a former program director at the National Science Foundation who's worked in the Convergence Accelerator, which is now in the Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, otherwise known as TIP. You can read a more illustrious bio later, but I want to get to Dr. Nathan Alexander. So do y'all remember that viral video where he was like teaching while he had a baby? Okay, that's my boy, But okay, so that's the viral part. But let me just be a little bit more scholarly. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Mathematics at Morehouse College. He teaches courses in mathematics, computational methods, education, and I just want to add like child development, because you knew exactly what to do right there. His work explores the development of critical and justice-oriented practices in quantitative literacy development. His work sits at the intersection of humanities, social science, mathematics, computational science, with a particular focus on Black history and Afrofuturism in national and global contexts. In Morehouse, he directs the Quantitative Histories Workshop, a community-centered teaching and learning lab for students and faculty in the ACU. So these are our 2 guests. We want you to give them our full attention. They will go in the order that I presented, and then we look forward to substantial Q&A right there at the mic. So without further ado, Dr. Washington, please come up. Oh, you're gonna go first? Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Dr. McGee said, I'm Nathan Alexander. I'm at Morehouse College here in Atlanta. Everyone knows where the AUC is, right? So we're about 20 minutes south on the highway. I want to thank ICQCM for the invitation this evening. And I'm just going to walk you all through some of the work that my lab does. And it's the Quantitative Histories Workshop, just to give you what I sort of identify as an abstraction to critical quantification. So most of what we see and think about quantitative critical work tends to focus around statistics. I tend to take a more abstract approach to that. And so we'll begin with this photo that you all saw here. So I'll just have you think about what was on your mind as you saw this photo here. And so the talk I'll be presenting tonight is some work that I've been doing since I was in Oakland, California. A lot of this work came out of our work at San Quentin Prison. So my students and I, and we still do this, we visit folks that are incarcerated every couple of weeks. I tend to have students sort of think about who they know that's incarcerated. I have 4 cousins that are incarcerated. We are pen pals. One of them is serving life. And so part of the work that I began was working on social justice math in San Quentin Prison. That work now is in Metro Reentry Center, and this is really where this work started, mathematical models in the sociological imagination. And so to begin with this idea of abstraction, do you all just want to call out what came to your mind as you saw this image? And this is called Raise Up by Hank Willis Thomas. Anyone want to just holler out what they thought about what they saw this? Praise, all right. Anyone else think about praise? Stuck in what? Stuck in whiteness? Drowning. In the wake, okay. Slavery. So you see all these different, did anyone think about, so we heard praise like church, right? Stop and frisk. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret this image, right? And one of the things that I like to remind folks is that when we do the practice of mathematical modeling, there's a lot of interpretations of a model. And so a lot of these connections between imagery and what we hear Fred Moten talk about is really about media and how media sort of really invokes us to think about criticality. And I begin with this idea that when we're mathematical modeling, we're working with symbols, and symbols are all they are, and that we put meaning into those symbols. So when we see a formal model, we're adapting symbols into that, and that is the base root of this idea of what I call mathematical models in the sociological imagination. So what I'm going to take you through is sort of what an undergraduate student, I work mostly with Morehouse students who are just getting out of high school. Most of them have had horrible experiences with math. And my goal as a professor in the math department is to show them that there's more to math than what they've really done in high school, which is problem solving. What is X, and how fast can you find it? And so my goal really is to think about the different sub-areas of math, and I tend to focus on geometry and topology. And so those sort of give students a different way to think about mathematics, but also adapt to this critical quantification. So I'll just give you the first month in our lab as if you just got to Morehouse and sort of the work that we do. So what do you all see in this image here? Where do you all think this comes from? What period of time? Antebellum? Let me add something else here. Add something else. So we talk a lot about history and public policy. And what we know the 3/5 compromise was a ploy. It was a ploy used to dehumanize black people while also utilizing their bodies for representation. Is everybody familiar with that? And in that process, as I like to remind our lab, because I work with a lot of young men, that women were also devalued in this period, even by the very black men who were given rights, right? So there's a lot happening when we think about how historically mathematics and quantification has been rooted within our own way of thinking about the law and how we even structure the United States. Does anyone know who this person is? Hazel Brown, do I remember this? And so we talk about a lot of what's happening around there. So when we think about the Little Rock Nine here, I like to think about what was in that notebook. And one of those classes was probably math. And she was just trying to go to class and learn some math. So as we think about critical quantification, we also have to be reminded of the surrounding context, sort of what was going on. And then I'll end with this picture here. Does anyone remember what this is and who this person is? You can call it out. Jesse Owens, right, from the Olympics. Does anyone know what Hitler was trying to do with this Olympics Games? Yes, solidify the master race. Jesse Owens came and messed that up, right? So we have a lot of students that major in kinesiology and are interested in sports, and so they spend a lot of time thinking about, historically, sports analytics is really popular in data science right now. Thinking historically about, the roots of what we see here historically. And so I start with these call to action axioms by a close colleague of mine, Federico Ardilla, who's at the University of California, San Francisco. And I specifically focus on the third axiom, is that math can be used in really powerful ways, and that how many of us were taught math is not how we have to use mathematics. We were taught math to find an answer or solution, which is what's called problem solving. But this is not how we have to use math. And so a lot of what we use math, as you saw through those images, is to really rethink history. And so I'm going to talk to you about two primary fields which are mathematical sociology and quantitative history, which sort of root the lab work that we do. But before that, I'll show this image here. What do you all see? Einstein, you all know where he is? Lincoln University. Does everybody know where Lincoln is? It's in Pennsylvania. Yes. And so one of the big shifts for me, I went to graduate school at Teachers College in New York, was the shift that I felt like as a grad student, I was trying to convince white people that black people were not bad. And that's what I was writing for, and I was struggling. And I think a lot of the work that I've done at Morehouse has sort of moved away from that. I think when we look at Einstein, he's an example of what I think an ally should look like. White folks should be talking to other white folks and other folks in power about what's happening. And I like to show this picture when I'm on a Zoom meeting with a lot of people that are not us and say, like, this is what you all need to be doing. We're gonna focus on something else. I like to get undergraduates to do math and to use math historically, as opposed to us trying to talk and convince people who historically haven't done that. And so when we go back to this concept of mathematical modeling, I focus a bit on the abstraction and how symbolic values and meanings sort of are situated around historically what was happening in Europe with the development of math. And when we think about what was happening here within the United States, we weren't even allowed to learn to read and write. And so really paralleling those two and having students to understand what was happening across continents and across spaces is really us thinking about what possible abstractions could have been made had history been a little bit different or a lot of bit different. And so one example of that, as I talked about geometry, is Euclid's elements. So has anyone heard of Euclidean geometry and non-Euclidean geometry? And so when we think about those two, we think about what happened in the development of math was putting the person at the center of that, this sort of idea of individualism. And so when we think about geometry specifically, it was rooted around this individualized way of thinking, you know, perspective, angles, and everything. When we go to the opposite end, we begin to think about some of the work that was taken in cultures. So maybe you've heard of ethnomathematics, and we think about what was happening across different cultures, which was not based on this individualistic perspective of mathematics. And so as I talk more about our lab, I'll take you all through the three components that we focus on. The first is mathematical sociology. So I'm not sure if you've all heard of math sociology, but quickly, it takes what's intuitive to us, which is sociology and these social theories, and it formalizes those theories using formal mathematical methods. And then we do a lot with quantitative historical study. So we start with very simple examples, like the images that we saw at the beginning of the talk, and we go to more modern examples, thinking about how can we use databases, structures to sort of make sense of society. And then we use a vast number of critical theories to sort of root our understanding. So students are now thinking about mathematics, thinking about history, and also this idea of critical theory all sort of in the afternoon. We meet about 2 days a week from 3 to 5. So here are the two journals that I have them start with. And we think about what they've been publishing. And what we notice is that there's never conversations about African American communities, there's never conversations about critical quantification, but a lot of what's discussed is issues that we talk about. So they're talking about inequity, they're talking about segregation, but it always fails to get to the historical components that we need to talk about. And so I think a lot of our work is to sort of really think about how these journals and this work in these two domains can really be rethought with this concept of critical quantification. And so I'll speed through these, and I'm happy to share these. I think there'll be a talk. But in quantitative historical study, there was a period where there was a lot of journals using history and quantification. And in mathematical sociology, for all of you that have social networks like Instagram or Twitter, you know, that's really what we know about math sociology. Social network theory is a very popular subdiscipline of math sociology. What we know about math sociology is that it has yet to take up some of the more critical theoretical concepts that sociologists have been doing for decades. And so it's still really leaned towards math, but not yet critical. And so we begin with a very simple framing for math modeling, where we take the real world, we ask what the phenomena is, and then we go through these observations. So this is where the quantitative history comes in. We think about what data sources and structures are available for us to think about models and how can we analyze those models and make some predictions. And when we think about predictions, we think really broadly. So it's not just getting a single outcome, but more so, what are the types of things that we want to understand and learn about history? And so I'll go through 3 components that we look at. The first is the past. And a lot of what we have here is sort of looking historically at what examples exist for us to make sense of how many African Americans have already done the quantitative critical work that we seek to do. And so in this first inquiry, we were sort of thinking about what was happening in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where African Americans were connecting quantification, race, and injustice. And that second one was thinking about whatever they were finding, how did it relate to what a lot of data scientists, statisticians, and mathematical modelers are finding today. And so in doing that work, we focus on a lot of these individuals. Benjamin Banneker, as you all know. One less known example, does anybody know about the Radical Republicans? So in South Carolina, right after emancipation, there are all these black senators that rush and to get elected. And they're actually using demography and population dynamics to decide whose neighborhoods and whose communities they're going to fight for. So we spent some time in Charleston looking in the archives, and you'd be surprised at their strategies. Their strategies to sort of use data and analyses around where individuals were to sort of get power for black communities. We spent a lot of time on Ida B. Wells Barnett, who talked about lynching and policing statistics that we relate to today. Kelly Miller was the first graduate student, black graduate student, to get a master's in mathematics. So we often talk about folks who got PhDs in math, but he was the first student to get a master's in mathematics. And he did a lot of work to connect math and sociology. We spend time talking about the work of Du Bois. As you all know, he was at Atlanta University for quite a time, right at the turn of the century, doing a lot of the infographics that you might have saw him do on the census data for African Americans in Atlanta. Bob Moses with the Algebra Project, and Gloria Latson-Billings with colleagues who's really set up this idea about how we should be teaching our children and what this should look like. And so I'll pause to just talk about Bob for a moment. Bob was a great mentor that I met through my advisor, Erica Walker, and this is us at the Data for Black Lives Conference. We lost Bob a few years ago, but I've been reminded by Bob a lot. I was very stressed about tenure and all these other things, and he reminded me that none of that stuff was important. It was important to teach our children. And so I encourage you all as you do the grant work to make sure that young people are involved in whatever you're doing. And that is the one kernel that I've gotten from Bob that's sort of set with me. And so doing that with young people as they get to Morehouse from high school has been really, really important to all this work and to sort of what Dr. McGee says, that revolution has to be funded. And I think as we get that funded, the young people are going to be the people that are going to actually activate that revolution. So I'll talk about a bit what's in the archives. I have about 10 minutes or maybe less. So most of what we did with that first inquiry when we were looking historically, we went through Du Bois's archives and we noticed a lot of math out of context. And we spent some time, we wanted to do math. It's like, what calculations was he doing? And so we're thinking historically, this is in 1900s, what's happening? So I encourage you to take a photo. This is a problem I would give students, and I say, come back tomorrow and let's figure out what calculations he was doing. So imagine you just got to college and your professor's giving you a piece of paper and he's like, figure out what's going on here. And so Du Bois was doing something in the advancement of racial justice, and it might be a calculation on numbers, on some food or some budgets he wants or some grants, but it's a sort of first activity for them to think about archives and quantification. Once we finish that, they begin to look at these infographics, which I think everyone has seen before. And so we spent a lot of time on the infographics thinking about history. So rather than using these to talk more about quantification, I asked them what was happening during these periods. And it's a period for me and us to learn about history. And so we particularly spent a lot of time on this one. I think this is a beautiful image about communicating math and sort of getting folks to think about what was happening right around 1860. And so we know the Civil War and emancipation was taking place. Du Bois and his team did an excellent job with this infographic here. I really like this one because my students struggle with fractions. All students struggle with fractions. And this is a great example of getting them to think about fractions. So I encourage you again to take a picture of this and ask yourself, what's happening as the fractions go through the years, as we go from 1860 to 1890 and so forth? What is the narrative that Du Bois is trying to tell us? Because remember, he's in Paris at this time, and he's talking on a world stage, trying to let the world know, one thing, that all African Americans are not the same, but also that we deserve rights like everyone else. So I always asked him, what was he trying to convey in this image? We talk about census data. We use a lot of census data in R, the tidy census package. And in fact, students recreate these infographics. And this is their first time coding. So we teach the students how to code, and they do a replication project. So it's just taking an infographic and learning how to replicate that infographic as a base project. When we get to the present projects, we sort of ask this question about how do we shift to radical models to talk about injustice? And so I'll skip through this, but what we've seen historically when it comes to spatial analysis is that there have been radical shifts in fields before. And so the miasma theory of bad air was when health and a lot of that field really shifted when they realized that it wasn't air that was getting people sick. It was because there wasn't nice sewage pipes to take the germs away. And so we've seen this happen in other fields, and I think when we begin to talk more specifically, again, about the geometrical realities that we all see, so this is where the math sociology comes in. It's intuitive when we drive or get on the trains in our cities, we see differences across neighborhoods. And I'm interested in getting students to understand how do we mathematize that or quantify that. And so we think a lot about geospatial analyses. So I'll take you all through an example. Do you all remember this case with the Keystone Pipeline? So we know that the pipeline ultimately did destroy the land, it did destruct it. And so we think about indigeneity. So imagine I'm working at Morehouse College with a lot of young black men, and I remind them that indigeneity and indigenous people are also very important. And so as we think about what's happening over time, I'll ask you to think about area. What do you all notice as we move forward in time? And so now they're thinking about how, again, law and public policy, so we have reservations, but often people don't know what was there before. So this is the process of colonization. When we think more abstractly about the Keystone Pipeline, which is this red line through, I have us work through this first theorem, and it's called the dividing walls theorem. So I'll explain it to you all quickly. And so imagine that there's two towns, a blue town and a green town, and there's a red wall that divides those towns. And we all know this story intuitively. These are highways, these are structures that were built to separate communities. And so they start with this theorem that connects topography and topology. And topology is a subfield of math that basically says a donut and a coffee cup are the same thing. Can anyone guess why topologists would say that? They both have one hole, right? So there's a connection there. And I have them work through this theorem. So I know I don't have a lot of time, but I would encourage you to try to find the dividing wall. So what is the red line that separates the blue towns from the green towns there? And there's one example of that. We extend this theorem by thinking about borders. And so we look at the second theorem thinking about what's called coastal towns, and we talk about boundaries. And so we talk a lot about gentrification. So this is all a process of the students getting ready to go back to coding, where we do a lot of work in R, and we use a tidy census package. And so now they're thinking abstractly about the geometry or the geospatial analyses before they jump straight to the data analysis in R. And as they do that, they're making sense of how math can be used abstractly to understand what we all feel intuitively, which is segregation. And so I'll give you all a very quick example. So we make a lot of maps in my lab. I'm gonna skip this. We'll talk about it in just a second. We make a lot of maps in my lab. And so before we jump into these maps, so this is a map of Fulton County, which is where we are now. And it's based on the tidy census package, and this is census data from 2020. And we're basically looking at segregation in Atlanta. And if you all can imagine, where we see that shift over is the Highway 20 that we all know that you cross through. So everyone knows if you live in South Atlanta, it's like where the black people are in Atlanta, historically. And so the formal model for this is called the Index of Dissimilarity. It was used in a Supreme Court case, and so students didn't learn. I love having them work through fractions. And so they learn about modeling, and we use this model to make sense of segregation formally. And so this is what it looks like. So imagine now that each black dot represents a black household or a predominantly black neighborhood, and each white dot represents a non-predominantly black neighborhood or a non-black household. What do you all notice from a political line when I draw those neighborhoods vertically. Complete integration. Can everybody see that? All the neighborhoods are similar, right? What happens when we just don't change the location of the neighborhoods or houses, but we now draw them horizontally? And so this really becomes an indictment of using math to talk about policy, because we know the policymakers are the ones who draw the districts and lines. We talk about gerrymandering and gentrification. I'm gonna rush through these slides. This is the census data that we use, and what we get students to do is to think about their neighborhoods and their homes. And I use Atlanta as their first example, as their new home. And they go back through their own homes or wherever they're from, and they do these projects. And we bring high school students in the afternoon. And so this is a poster from our high school students, and we have a near-peer mentoring model. So during the week, college students are learning how to model, and then the following week, our high school scholars come, and the college students teach them how to model. And the goal is to get our high school students to complete a research poster. And so this is an example of that research poster on the model where they're making sense of gerrymandering and gentrification. And these are our high school scholars working on some networks and some maps, some graphs here to make sense of those. We also have students think about homelessness and housing insecurity. And so all of our projects are not about geometry, but some students get to choose the modeling that they do. And I'll finish briefly with the work that our more advanced students. So we do have some students who join our lab who have experience coding and have experience with data analysis. And so we think about a lot of what we can get them to do to advance their thinking. And so our project this spring was on fatal police interactions. And so I'm not sure if you all heard of the new Cop City conversation going on. And so that was what the students decided that we would work on this year. And so we did Poisson regression. It's count data. We looked at the number of police shootings. So we used a Poisson model, which takes count data to think about fatal police interactions. And in doing that, we connected it to the Ida B. Wells historical red record and Southern horrors, which she was talking about lynching. And so we looked at relational databases. And so first students read the red record and Southern horrors, and they coded the data into an Excel sheet. And that's what you're seeing here, and they coded that by year. And in doing that, we made sense of what the Washington Post is collecting is records of every fatal police shooting in the United States. And so we were making sense of these police shootings. This is an example of a database that the students made along with the lab. And Ben the Gamer is one of our students. He's great. And he was responsible in the lab for creating a lot of our databases. So we merged data from the Kaiser Family Foundation, from the census data, and from different data sources so that students could do a lot of that work. And here's an example of the count data from the fatal police shootings. And we had our sophomore, junior, and senior students build a Poisson model, which looked at structures and systems. And so rather than think about an individual neighborhood, we looked across the United States. And in doing that, we looked at the number of fatal police shootings, and we were really interested in what we know. Policing happens in Black neighborhoods. And so as we thought about that, we were looking at the white population ratio per state and the poverty rate. So we don't just think about where Black people are located. If you all know Atlanta, a lot of Black people have money here. And so we think about race and class and the intersections for those. And in doing that, we also thought about age. So a lot of our young people are highly and heavily policed in a lot of urban areas. And what we found, here's the poster with our colleague, Dr. Zhang. What we found is that as a white population decreases and a Black poverty rate increases, we can expect what we know intuitively for there to be more fatal police interactions. So this wasn't new as much as it was students working through an entire project in a semester. And I'll end with just some of the work that students think about the future. So I had them think about their careers and where they're going. And so the question that we asked about what collective futures do we seek, and we read this story by Du Bois. I'm not sure if y'all ever heard of The Prince of Steel. So Du Bois wrote science fiction. So this is available in his archive. And so they read over the weekend The Prince of Steel, and they learn about this megaphone that Du Bois was talking about, where it allows us to think intuitively about sociology. And so in doing that, we have students think about future methodologies. So we're talking about stuff today, but what do we think about 5, 50, or 100 years from now? So if you can think about in the beginning of this activity, we started 100 years in the past, and now we have them thinking 100 years into the future. You know, where are we going with this? And a lot of that is rooted in Afrofuturism, as Dr. McGee said. And so I've written a chapter on that, which is a science fiction story. And it really takes this 100 years in the future. All of our kids know how to learn math. And what we understand in this chapter is now we've begun to colonize space. And in colonizing space, our young people who know math are now slave labor on different planets. It's a very interesting chapter. If you get a chance to read it, I like it. I don't know if it's the best scholarship, but it's an interesting story, I hope. And so I'll end with sort of the route that I have them as they exit their first year in the lab, which is Manny Marable's Black intellectual tradition. And so it's really reminding them that as we think about this, all of our work should be descriptive. So what are the realities of our Black lives, and how do we think about that? How is it corrective? How are we challenging these mainstream discourses? And how is it prescriptive? So how do we envision new practices for the future? And so in doing this all, we think about what I like to call a critical mathematical praxis. And in doing this, it roots all of what we know. And I think a really good field that's burgeoning that some scholars are working on is called Black educational studies. And so I think that's kind of where I'm going to start reading more and understanding more about Black educational studies. And I will end there, and I will hand it over to Dr. Washington and thank her for all the funding that she gave me this year. And this is the students when we were in Zoom from my lab, 2021, 2022, and this is us this year. Thank you all. You say what? I can't. We can do it together. Do we want to do questions now, or do we want to wait?
They're drinking their wine.
No?
Ah. Oh, God. All right, cool. So my name is Talitha Washington. I am the director of the Atlanta University Center Data Science Initiative, which means I get to hang out with the cool people like Dr. Nathan Alexander, who does amazing work in data science. So, I mean, I'm just, yeah, so fantastic. Love the presentation, love your work, what you're doing. So, yeah, policing is definitely right there with us. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our work. And then just note that and I'll probably say this again, all of my comments are my own and do not represent the views of any organization. I'll say that again, and it's on the slide. You know, you just gotta, keep it there. Okay, so I came here to the Atlanta University Center. I started in August of 2020. And here I am sitting in front of 4 amazing presidents who said, first we need you to figure out this initiative. I'm like, well, what is it? They said, figure it out. That's what we hired you for. And we want this to be the hub for all HBCUs in data science. I was like, okay, but it really has been a pleasure to work with President Thomas, President Montgomery Rice, President Gale, and President French, who really joined together and looked at the data science landscape and said, we need to do something because data impacts everything that we do, from getting loans to our health, to gerrymandering, to predictive policing. I mean, it could go on. And we need to have diverse talent to really bring palatable solutions. And as they say, teamwork makes the dream work. I am joined with an amazing team. We are hiring an administrative coordinator, so if you know anybody who wants to join, let me know. But really, together as a team, we're committed to advancing data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the learnings, cybersecurity techniques that focus on ethics and bias, and really topics that impact Black America. We do this with our sponsors who help support our work. We were initially funded by United Health Group back in 2019, who wanted to increase the diversity pipeline in data science. So really are thankful for them. And our work really is this circle of working with our industry folks, working with the faculty who work with the students and provide the new research innovations, who then motivate our students to go and do more and be more. And it just, we all work together. It's an amazing work. Just give you some examples of, so now I'm gonna kind of pivot because you all are here to like do grant writing, that sort of things. Okay. So what is my role in this whole grant writing sort of thing? This is Dr. San Solomon. She's an assistant professor of chemistry, computational chemist at Clark Atlanta. We were like, let's write an REU grant. Let's write it. Wait, we need a PI. So I helped write an REU grant, and she's the PI. I'm not on the grant, which is great. But it was really neat to, I'm a glutton for punishment, okay? And there is a methodology for writing this research experience for undergraduate grants. As you see, there's a lot of unwritten expectations for what is seen as palatable when we do write these proposals. But what did I do? I called up a friend who, well, he likes to complain a lot. But in between the complaining, I can get, well, what do you do? I have a schedule. Well, what is this? I have this. So I just call people, how do you do this? Well, what is that? And you know, we get it done. And of course, we were funded, and it's been an amazing program. Also, when I came, Dr. Kenneth Gaucher is a computer science professor at Morehouse College, also the executive director of the Browning Participation Center in Computing. And we actually wrote the Sloan Foundation grant for the Open Doors open source program. I forgot, what was it? I forget the amounts. I'm not really good with numbers. I'm a mathematician, but you know, numbers are not my thing. But I worked with him on this grant thing, and I'll say. But he was really great because he has this mind that just goes, and I'm just like trying to keep up with it, right? It was when I first came. But the program was great. He had his team, I had my team. We had to figure out how to work together. So great collaborator. And we figured it out, stuck it out in the whole team formation sort of thing, to the point now. Okay, don't tell anybody at Morehouse this. But we're in the, he said I'm not supposed to say it. But if you read the NSF appropriations request to Congress for fiscal year 24, we're in it. I was reading the email, I said, that looked familiar. I said, oh, that's our project. Oh, wait, I need to turn in some paperwork. So, okay. So, yeah, that's how I think. It's really bizarre. So the Texas Advanced Computing Center, they want to have a distributed computing nodes, and we'll be one of the nodes, Pittsburgh, San Diego. Oh, there's always a fourth one, I can't remember. I'll remember it later. And then we'll have a node here at the Atlanta University Center to have a high-performance computing center. So, and I was like, hey, Gaucher, can you be the PI? Sure, great. So, So grants are kind of fun in that you can kind of work with your friends and, hey, do you want to do this and do you want to do that? I don't know, it's kind of bizarre, but so cross your fingers. We haven't really went totally public, but we're in there. Also had the pleasure of working with Dr. Herman Taylor and his team. He's the director of the Cardiovascular Research Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine. So there's this EMAHEAD project. I don't know what NIH was thinking. It's like $50 million over a short period of time, like a year or two. Who does that? NIH did, right? It's probably because ARPA-H was coming on the scene, but y'all know ARPA-H? Read on that one. That's a really interesting one. There's DARPA, which is like for defense. You know what I'm talking about? Now, take off the D, put an H on the end. It's the same funding mechanism where they're in the project, but it's for healthcare because we want to advance healthcare. So in that you have technology, you have social science, you have education, you have all of these things to try to figure out how to make communities healthier, right? But anyway, so I've worked with him and his team in writing the proposal to NIH for a hub thing there. So it was, Saturday night, Sunday night sort of thing, just writing. But again, just a really great group of folks. And we have weekly meetings. And we'll be, if anybody wants to come back to Atlanta, this is a shameless commercial. With the AIM Ahead team, we're doing a symposium on the power of data behind Black health. So it's just been fun to explore different topics in data science, and we weave in and out of different things. When I first started, I said, there are a set of like data science institutes that were funded by Sloan. There's one, Midas at Michigan, there's one at UC Berkeley, NYU, Columbia, right? There's all these, Rice, there may be one or two more. But there were all these institutes and they talked to each other. I said, where are my friends? So, I'm like in high school, maybe middle school, right? So I'm like, where are my friends? So I called up my friends at HBCUs. I'm like, you're leading this program institution-wide. You are, let's get together. So we sat and looked at each other. We first met October 2020, called them cold. We were like, what are we gonna do? I don't know. What we gonna do? I don't know. So one thing led to another, right? It really was a cold call. And we ended up funding this workshop. It's Data in the African Diaspora workshop, where we can think, and our keynote was Dr. Alexander, of course. And where we think about what does it mean to really teach this intersection from Atlanta to Nebraska, so that everybody's equipped to teach this. So working on the report there, and it was a collaboration. So this was probably a $99,000 grant. But then you know what they say, one thing leads to another, because we're like, well, what are we gonna do next, Well, we got $10 million to stand up the National Data Science Alliance from the NSF Includes program. NSF Includes program is broadening participation at scale, broadening participation in STEM. This is the 4th round of funding, and we're the first HBCUs to be like a lead, and the only project that focuses on HBCUs. So I was like, yeah. So a friend of mine actually tells me that I'm crazy because I actually write the proposals. I don't know. So I'm just gonna give you all the real story, right? So some people and then a colleague of mine, I remember Dr. Howard in Morehouse School of Medicine, she called me up on a Friday afternoon. She was all stressed out. I was like, Dr. Howard, I never wrote a grant until after I got to the AUC. She said, what? You had this, that? So I wrote all these grants I showed you all, right? I wrote them. But I didn't, you don't do it till you need to do it, right? And you kind of call people and ask how, this, what. Okay, fine. With this one, I put on about 15 pounds. Dunkin' Donuts was my friend. It was like a dissertation, right? It was a lot of work. So it's not for the faint of heart. It can be done. So don't think that just because you're coming in new, you can't do it. I came in new August of 2020. And this was after I was a program officer, so I did see that side, but I didn't see the side of writing one. So that's a different mechanism. So I'll just kind of share some of the insights and tidbits. But this National Data Science Alliance is an alliance across HBCUs, and we have 3 regional hubs. One's at Howard, one's at Fisk, and one's at Clark Atlanta University. And then we'll be doling out workshops this summer, curriculum development work groups, and research affinity cohorts starting next summer. So it's a big lift. Oof. But anyway, super fun because I have great colleagues, great team. So just as you know, I did work at NSF from 2017 to 2020. I first did a tour in the Division of Undergraduate Education with the Hispanic Serving Institutions Program, improving undergraduate STEM education. I was over the data science portfolio, and NOIS, which is a teacher preparation, and STEM, which is scholarship. In my first year, I was actually co-lead of the HSI program, and we stood up the program, meaning we wrote the funding codes, we wrote the solicitation, we had to do the internal stakeholder, external stakeholder. People were saying, why should we do it? So it was definitely throw the baby into the deep water, swim. I didn't sleep much then either. But it was great. And then when I was at NSF there, a friend of mine who calls himself my mentor, sometimes I wonder, he said, you need to go to the research side so you can see the other side. So I said, okay. So I applied to go do a detail in Convergence Accelerator, which is on the research side, multiple sectors, multiple disciplines coming to solve problems of societal interest. I was like, that's cool. So I worked there. I was over the quantum track there as well, and also worked in the data track. So everything else I'm going to say, and everything I do say, note my disclaimer. I'm not speaking on behalf of the foundation. Okay, so what are some insights? What are some things that I've learned, let's say, on both sides of the veil? So when we're thinking about, so now I'm pivoting to applying for grants. So when I'm applying for grants, I always think about what does the program want? Yeah, take photos because I don't share slides. And then what research areas are they interested in? I remember I told somebody, I said, do you want to write the proposal you like, or do you want to write the proposal that gets funded? Because I told them those are 2 different things. But so yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna tell you who it is. It hurt his feelings. It's a funny story. But anyway, and then also what motivates their interest, and then how much. If you're talking with the program director, sometimes they have influence, sometimes they don't. And so just to recognize that, and if you're applying to a program, whether it's Spencer or whatever, Sloan and stuff, whatever, what have they funded in the past? And what new thing can you bring to their funding portfolio? So for us, for the includes, they had no HBCUs and no data science, and we wrote that in there. Y'all need to fund us because we will do this for you, right? And so you want to look and see what they funded and how can you contribute to that. And then I know you all have some NSF things later on, right? Okay, so the PAPPG, which is the Proposal and Award Policies Procedures Guide, changes every year. It's annoying, but we just work through it, right? And then they change all the requirements for the auxiliary documents too. Here in chapter 2, in writing NSF proposals, you should, print it out, have it on your computer, whatever. That will tell you what the contents are, and you got to follow it to the T, right? If you don't, good luck. And then usually after I'm done writing, I'll do an audit to see did I actually follow it. So I'll do a check at the end, because sometimes we can diverge in what we write. Other documents. When we write a proposal, most funding agencies will have other documents that they want: facilities, equipment, and other resources, collaborators and other affiliations, biographical sketch, whatever, data management plan. So they want all of these other documents, and you can find them online. Okay? Don't write these things from scratch. Find somebody's document and then make it your own, right? So don't start from scratch in grant writing. That's just crazy. It's like programming. Nobody programs from scratch anymore. Get somebody else's and write on top of it. Harvard has a really good website resource, a checklist. I use their checklist. They also have templates for budget descriptions and templates for a whole lot of stuff. They did not pay me to say this. I don't know who works there. I just love their stuff for grant writing. So use that, but make sure this is done early, not only for you and for all the senior personnel, because I have known grants that were not able to be submitted because somebody didn't turn in something, or they turned in the wrong year document. It wasn't this year. It was like, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Exactly what you're talking about.
And then if you'd have,
Yeah.
and they're gonna turn in the wrong, it was from 5 years ago. Do you not see it says 2016 and we are in, right, yeah. And it will prevent the submission, and you trying to hit that button, and that button said, no, not today, not with that document. And you, if you're like the PI, I don't know, when I hit the button on the 10 million, I was shaking afterwards, literally. I'm not gonna tell you it was 3 minutes before deadline, but I was shaking, yeah. Yeah, it was, oh yeah, that was stress I don't want. But anyway, but have these documents done early for the whole team. If you gotta get your CD stuff together for the IRB, get your PI team do that stuff early, because they take too long to I won't go into it, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Get all of those documents out of the way. And also, when people look and review, so again, I'm not speaking on behalf of any foundation or anything, right? People look everywhere. If you're gonna give me your grant, sometimes when they review the proposal, they look around. So you wanna make sure that your profile online about you, number one, can be found, and number two is positive and says the positive research story about you and supports what you have proposed. So you don't want a LinkedIn page that hasn't been updated since 2015. Oh, she hid. Okay, you want to have right, you got to play the game. I mean, I appreciate the comments at the beginning. It is the game, right? You got to play the game. Your LinkedIn needs to match your CV, right? Put the stuff on there. Make sure people can find what you're doing. Some of our schools don't have websites that feature us in the most scholarly way. So you try to be nice. So y'all know what I'm talking about. So you want to make sure either your Google Scholar profile is up to date and quasi-accurate as best as you can. I update my CV monthly, and then I refresh it online at my website. Oh, my friends tell me monthly. I do mine weekly. Yeah, and then do goal setting. yeah, but they're like deans and they're really, yes, I'm getting there. But no, you should, in theory, right? I'm not gonna say you have to do it, but you should update your, nobody else gonna do it, this is all you. How bad you want it, right? People look at the whole package. So take the time to do that, keep it updated. And the org ID, all the rest of that. So when you're writing the proposal, what are some things you can keep in mind? So, what do they say? You can cite yourself. This is me citing myself. So these are slides that are actually publicly available when I presented at the HAKU conference. So when writing the proposal, think about the goals. What are you trying to accomplish? If I don't know what you're trying to do, why should I give you money, right? And then what will be the outcomes? I want to know, as a result of me giving you this money, you doing this project, what's going to be that return on my investment? And what will be the outcomes? What are the deliverables? And why should I care? And rationale. Why do you believe that you have a good idea? So just let me know. Like, how is this situated in the broader landscape? What problems it's solving, and how is that important? And then how does it tie into previous literature efforts? Do you have an understanding about how your work fits into the broader landscape? So when we wrote like our includes, we actually met with all of the funded includes programs, all of them, to understand what they did not do. I was reading everywhere to figure out how we would be situated in this broader landscape. And then why is your approach promising, right? How are you gonna pull it off? And then evaluation. How do you know that your project will remain on track to be successful? And so I always have to go back to say, wait, is this where we're going? Are we on the right track? Because we're scholars. We like to pontificate and be creative. And we also need to make sure we're on track. And then you also want to be explicit about how will you know if you succeed. We always say, at least I always say, everybody loves a good logic model. I didn't know what that was before I went to NSF, but I learned. I could write a good logic model now. So it's never too late, okay? So logic model, inputs, outputs, and in-betweens, milestone tables to actually organize, what is the activity? When will be completed? What is the product deliverable? Having that in a table and organizing that is helpful so you can think about evaluation and making sure you're checking off the box as far as what you're doing as you go along. And then dissemination. Just because you build something, make a website, publish a paper, how do you know people care about that? How do you know they will come? Sometimes if it's a complicated product that you're developing, maybe you need to workshop it out and actually have conversations with people and what should that look like. So thinking about dissemination beyond the traditional publication conferencing. Money. So I'm going to channel one of my colleagues at Clark Atlanta when I first came on, Dr. Eric Mintz. You know Dr. Mintz? Now, Talitha, you got to start with the budget. You have all of these ideas, and you have this much money. I was like, oh, that's how that, indirect cost. He said, what? Oh, you don't talk about, that's it, right? So and he would tell me over and over. So that's what I'm telling you all the things I did wrong so y'all could circumvent them. Start with the budget. So I'm working with a group of faculty, social work faculty, they're infusing data science into their curriculum, in the courses. They've run summer research programs with graduate students, undergraduates, presented their work. Fantastic tea. And so I'm like, okay, so I corner them. What do you want to do? Okay, this. I just want 3 bullets of what you're going to do, because it has to be very simple. You got to do the elevator stuff. So I said, okay. Now, from that, we can map out a budget. So I kind of mapped out the budget. They were like, oh, okay, let me toss this over to y'all so you can figure out how far this can or cannot go. So you do want to play around with budget. There are budget templates. If you cannot find one, let me know. I can send you one, right, for NSF budget so you can use your own institution's indirect cost. You want to make sure that you get, so if it's federal, whatever, get your institution's indirect cost rate agreement. I'm assuming y'all are writing proposals and some have submitted it. So I'm assuming y'all have that, right? Oh, what y'all laughing for? If you do not have your institution's current indirect cost rate, if you're public, you can Google it, right? If you're private, high research activity, you can probably still Google it. But if you're private and not so much high in the research, So this is me. I've looked up a lot of indirect cost rate agreements, okay? You may just have to ask your sponsor research office. Ask them for the indirect cost rate agreement so you know how the indirect cost is applied over the different categories, and spend time doing that. But again, get the templates. Do not start from scratch. Okay, so at least for NSF, nobody agrees on what should be done. Let me just start there. So this is an idea that may or may not be beneficial. So it's the Common Guidelines for Education and Research Development. If you are submitting for NSF, I highly recommend that you're cognizant of this document, you have read it, and have an opinion. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. I'm a mathematician, so whatever. But you want to know this language of how somebody at NSF back in whatever number that is, 2013 or whatever, how they thought about education, research, and development. So, and you want to know what these phases are and where will you fit in this phase if it's an education or education type project. All right. In the solicitations for NSF, there are references. So if you're going after a program, every reference you should read and read again, because that is an extension of the solicitation, of the call. And so most of the education ones, like I use and so on, they'll have this as a reference. So, okay, so how do you start writing? Well, y'all have already written already, right? So this is how I start writing if I'm coming in new. I actually will read the solicitation and say, okay, where's the outline? So from the solicitation, I'll pull out an outline. They want this, that's A. They want this, that's B. And my outline goes in the order of the solicitation. It's 1-to-1. Why am I kind of exact like that? And I copy paste the words. Don't get fancy. Because when you're a reviewer, or when some people are a reviewer, they will read the solicitation and they read your proposal against the solicitation. So if the solicitation asks for apples and you want to get cute and say Bartlett pears or, Granny Smith, they don't know Granny Smith is apples. Even a slight deviation in word choices. So how can a reviewer take from the solicitation the call and map that to what you're writing? So I use the exact word choices. If the proposal calls for apples, I'll say apples. If it calls for oranges, I'll say oranges. And here's how I'm dressing oranges. You get what I'm saying? So from that solicitation, NSF has a lot of review mechanisms, so their proposals are pretty good. I've seen some really bad ones, not in NSF. I won't comment. But anyway, I saw one today. I was like, what is this? You should be able to lift an outline from the solicitation if you read it close enough and just lift the language and make an outline. Once I make the outline, then what I do is I put bullets for each of them. For each of the points, make bullets, and then I'll add in, I need a reference for this, I'll need a reference for that. And then I'll invite my team to also make bullets. And then we'll turn those bullets into paragraphs, and then we'll add in the references, and then we have a proposal. So that's how everybody has a different mechanism, but that's what I found to work. Once I know what the outline is, the structure, I can then bullet it out, go back, put references, now we got paragraphs. Done, right? But I mean, it does, and Grammarly is my friend. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Grammarly. And if you don't know Grammarly, hey, that's the best $20. They can take that $20. Is it $20? I don't know. I don't even ask Grammarly. I'm just like, here, just do it. Just do it. Yes. So, because you want to use a spell check, because we can be petty, right? We can be, yeah, we can be very petty. Oh, they didn't spell that right. Well, they don't know, but come on, it was an accident. Okay. All right. So that's the mechanism. The grants that I'd like, so there are this is going to sound really weird. There are solicitations that I like, right? So when we wrote the Includes proposal, I like the planning grants for the engineering research centers because they tell you, you want your team, they want this, they want this. They tell you what the sections are. So I use that also to kind of spice up what I thought should be in the Includes proposal. So you can grab, even if you're looking at one solicitation, if there are nearby kind of programmatically or structurally similar, you can put it in there as well as far as developing the outline. Does that make sense? ERCs, engineering research centers, are national facing research centers. And we're doing an alliance that's national facing and will also be developing research center. So structurally, there's a lot of similarities there. So that's why I went to there. So I do read other solicitations to get ideas as a writer. And then also some of the unspoken expectations, looking at the qualifications, experience of the PIs, all of them. In print, notice I put online, that's the monthly CV update. So that it's unspoken. You know, again, it's just what we do. Infrastructure provided by the PI's institution. What is afforded there? So there is, in many grant funding mechanisms, they will ask what facilities you have. And so you want to make sure that you respond to something that supports the work that you'll be doing. You don't want just some sort of generic document. It should be specific to your project. And they look at publications. They'll look at relationships to the funder or other funding agents. Can you carry out the work? And also be a reviewer. And to review, at least at NSF, NIH is a little bit different. But in NSF, you don't have to have had an NSF grant to be a reviewer, and it's a great way to see the internal process. So you contact a program officer. Don't send a whole paragraph, send like 3 sentences. People don't read anymore, right? Hey, this is my field. I love to review. My 2-page bio sketch is attached, you know. And then in your signature, have a website link so they can get more if they want to. But you could reach out to program officers and say, I would like to review for that program, as long as you don't submit to it. And then also, the last thing here, information sources. You want to get information to kind of fill up your proposal. You want to talk with program officers and listen to what's important to them. Whenever we write a proposal, we'll develop a one-pager, you know, vet it out, submit it to a program officer and ask them to meet with us. The best thing you can do is when you meet with the program officer, you know, maybe say a couple sentences, a couple minutes. And some people get nervous and keep rambling, but really the best thing to do is just to shut up and listen to the program officer, because they'll know, and just take notes. And usually what I'll do is I'll have somebody with their camera off who's a designated note taker, who's taking notes, and we can be actively listening, because you need multiple people on the call so you can hear the different aspects. But to listen to, for them, what they want, what they see is important, what would they like to see, what would they like to find if they just could do that, right? So you can ask those open questions. And then you want to, thinking about aligning your work with your institution's priorities and with legislation. So in thinking about the data and crime, we're working with AUC police officers to do data dashboard. It's crime and data is aligned with Morehouse. It's in Morehouse's strategic plan to do data science and work with the data science initiative. So aligning your work with the institution and knowing if it is aligned or if you need to do some motivating, right, we'll say. And then legislation. Think about if it's a federal agency, the trickle effect, plus or minus, sigma, I guess, epsilon, is that you have legislation that happens on the Hill. That legislation influences funding and how funding is allocated and the funding programs and the language in the programs. So you reading a solicitation for the first time after it is published by the agency is too late. You actually want to be reading legislation on the Hill. Like if you haven't read the CHIPS Act, you want to read the CHIPS Act and see where you can fit in, because that's hot right now, because they need to develop talent, workforce development. They don't have enough people to do it. They need diverse talent, you know, US talent to do it. So you want to read these different acts and legislation before they hit the agencies so you can get an idea about how can you position your work to be ready, right? And so AIP News is a great mechanism to subscribe to. I put it in a folder and I read it during lunch. And then when you write your proposal, use language from the legislation. Because the agencies, at least for the federal, who get their money from Congress, they try their best, right, to respond to Congress and be good stewards of the US tax dollars. So you want to know what the agencies are listening to. So subscribe to the news, think about legislation at the federal level and also at the state level. Like, so right now, Dr. Justin Ballinger, a colleague of mine, we did a data science for K-12 working group, and listening session, and we're writing a report, and I said we need to include the legislation of what's happening, right? Georgia, we have the Senate Bill 108, which says by 2024, every high school, middle school is gonna have a computer science course. Right? That's crazy. Think about rural Georgia. Right? So we need to have that in the report, and we need to be thinking about how our work also intertwines with, workforce development, either at the state, federal level, what have you. So legislation is important, for me anyway, in the data job, and thinking about building capacity, building the workforce, building solutions for the good of society. And then interinstitutional teams. So in thinking about writing grants, I don't know if we're single PIs or a team, interdepartments, or interinstitutional. So these are just some tidbits that I've learned that whenever, if you're approached for collaboration or approach somebody else, at least we like to have an understanding of the shared goals, objectives, and visions. Oftentimes, some institutions will come to us as if we were an afterthought, or if our only goal in life was to provide them our cherished underrepresented students. You know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, no. Actually, I told one person, I said, my staff person, I won't say which one, she hates when I say this, but I said, we are not your feeding ground for underrepresented students. And I just looked at them like and then another person, I said, wait, if you think you can teach our students better, well, why don't you have them in the first place, right? Anyway, okay, I'll get off that little soapbox because I can. Okay, it's because we get approached a lot for partnerships. There's a lot of money right now coming out of the federal government. Biden put the legislation to get the ball rolling, so a lot of non-MSI institutions are now saying, hey, I can get money if I partner with an HBCU, if I partner with an HSI or tribal college. But I haven't figured out how to build this. There's a disconnect in communication, in expectation, in valuing the intellectual contribution. So those, I stay away from that. I don't have time for that. So, and then also shared decision-making and aligned expectations. And establishment, who owns what? Like, if you're gonna generate data or generate information, who's gonna own it and who's gonna keep it, right? And just to be frank with that, and timeline of the partnership, and articulate what each partner gains by working together. So I was on a conversation actually before I came, a colleague of mine at Georgia Tech, and she was like, I want this letter for my thing. I was like, okay, well, what do you want? Okay, well, if we do this activity, it will benefit you how, and it will benefit me how, right? So we can co-collaborate around activities that are mutually beneficial. But if you can't articulate how both parties will benefit, why do it? It's a waste of time. I can do other things, right? And then also know what your partners value and what each partner contributes. So I knew that Fisk University was the first institution in Tennessee to have an undergraduate program in data science. So I was like, I need you on my team because you know how to do this, right? So I knew that, and I value that aspect. So you want to, and you remind the partner that this is the aspect that you bring, and I need you to bring this to the table. I find that a lot of these interinstitutional teams is like dating, right? You don't want to be in a relationship where they don't remind you how nice you are. You want to be, everybody likes to be flattered, okay? So so do that. And then convene partners beginning and throughout. If you have an evaluator, you got to come on at the beginning. And I do shared documents. I don't need to own anything. And you just share it throughout and share the work and know who's supposed to do what, right? So I found that this works best in these interinstitutional teams and just trying to make things go. And really, at the end of the day, everybody's just to have fun and as the young people say, secure the bag. So with that, if you want to stay connected with us, this is a QR code for data science, and like to be connected and here to answer any questions. And y'all ask anything. Whether or not you're gonna get a good response is another story, right? We're getting chance. We need a microphone though. Oh, you don't need a microphone. You want me to sit in that high chair with my old self?
Thank you.
Oh, there's so loud. I should wear pants. I gotta figure out how to sit in the chair.
You may get that baby a shorter chair. So after I went to the bar, which seems entirely inappropriate, after a long week before I sat in a keynote for an hour, food was delicious, by the way, thank you. These are two fantastic presentations. I'm really happy to hear them. I do have a question for you, Dr. Talithia. Where is sustainability in your list of things that you should be aware of for an NSF application? Like you had discovery, you had dissemination, you had preparation, but where does sustainability come from? And this is from a conversation I was having with the young man earlier about what happens when the money runs out, right? How do you then make sure that the community you're working with are still able to participate in the benefits from the grant? So I'll stop there.
Excellent question. And for the record, I had to delete a lot of slides since, I like to talk a lot, so I had, Okay, but yeah, so sustainability. So what will be around after the project ends, right? Because projects, what are projects? Projects are time-bound. You have deliverables, benchmarks, time marks. So I actually, when I was with Howard, working under Wade Boykin, who works at Capstone Institute. Yep, I'm a Wade Boykin trainee, right? And so I was working with this complicated project, and I went to a leadership training thing. Somebody said, you know what? If you haven't done project management training, do it. And I said, oh, stop the press. What is that? Had no idea, right? And so then I jumped in and I did a certification program at Georgetown on project management because I didn't understand how to manage complicated projects and that there were theories and methodologies. Now we have Coursera. You can just watch the videos and learn it, right? But yeah, it was the best investment in myself ever. I paid for that out of pocket. So sustainability, thinking about when the project ends, what will be around. So like it could be there's going to be a new course. There could be a research product. There could be new institutional policies. There could be trained students. There could be, what will happen. Now for our NSF Includes Alliance, we think about that all the time, right? And we also think, 10 mil is not enough. We need another 10, right? And then if the money runs out, then what and how do we do it? Do we become a membership organization? Do we do this organization? How should we grow? And it's still open. But we're always thinking about what will be there later. What will be there, at least for ours, is we will be a catalyst to develop data science programs at HBCUs, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. That's sustainability. That will stick, that will be there. And we also don't have a venue, an organization that links together all HBCUs around some sort of academic discourse. There's no one. Haku is amazing. They do it for HSIs. I love them to death. They're great. We don't have it for HBCUs, so we want to be that. So and I think there's value in creating those cross-fertilizations. We create a larger community of practice over the 101, 104, however you want to count it, right? But you want to think about what will be left at the project end. A new course, a new syllabus, a new this, a new that. What will stick around? So not everything, to be frank, not everything will happen after the project, but what will happen. So that's how I think about sustainability, right? And be creative, right? Be creative and think about the impact of the work. She said no.
Okay, Jeffrey Pearson, Morgan State.
The great Morgan State?
Yes, indeed. I show all my stuff. I'm a K through 12 educator, and he's the brother I was talking to before this, and we were talking about data analysis in the school system, and I didn't know y'all were presenting on this, but I'm wondering, I don't know if people are familiar mostly with mathematics data analysis curriculums, is that a lot of times the statistics portion is pushed to the back. And if you do evaluations on a lot of the textbooks, the data portion will come to the back, And then you have a hierarchy in mathematics where students are introduced kind of to statistics throughout 4 through about 9th grade, and then they take geometry, and there's no statistics, and then algebra, they may or may see statistics, and the statistics is optional. I think that's purposeful, that we're not teaching students about statistics and how to use statistics to change their communities. So I'm wondering, as we brainstorm how to get students, similar to robotics, similar to the health and sciences, that what would be the best methodology of trying to target our K through 12 education? Would it be advocating for a change in the curriculum where there's a more emphasis on the statistics and that the statistics is being assessed and taught throughout the curriculum, or taking a more of an approach of developing programs in the elementary and the middle school to teach them more about statistics? Because if you try to teach them in high school, it's kind of too late, similar to some of your other STEM programs in health and sciences.
So I would call myself a product of Wade Boykin, because he was the one working with him doing teacher training and preparation, and I would do the math content knowledge. So I would do it through the teachers, and that's what we're doing. Right, so in Georgia, starting this fall, all teachers K through 12 will be required to teach data science and data literacy. And so we held a listening session. So Justin Ballinger brought together all like the K-12 oriented folks around the AUC, around a working group to figure out what are people doing, what should we do. They said we need to do a listening session to listen to the educators and have a conversation about what we should do. And so we did that. It was great. It was at the library. About half the folks came from either K-12 schools. They also came from the district and state levels. And then the other half came from the AUC. And we all listened to each other. We have a report almost done. And I asked the question. I said, okay, if Georgia is expecting you to teach in the fall, do you have the curriculum? Do you have access to training and other resources? They were like, nothing. I said, oh, that's a problem. Right? So as a teacher, right, if I put my teacher hat on, I'm not going to be comfortable teaching something I don't know, right? Especially if I have classroom management challenges or something else, right? It's just, and if I'm uncomfortable or weird about it, it may get pushed to the back of the book. So my stance is, let's equip and empower the teachers to teach data science, to teach data literacy in a meaningful way with some interesting applications, and equip them. So the idea is to create an atmosphere where the kids can thrive in data science or data literacy. So so Dr. T to the rescue at Clark Atlanta, and Dr. Valerie, what's her last name? Bennett at Clark Atlanta, they're creating a computer science certification online program with a data science focus. And we funded 2 of their projects, so they're working on that this summer. I'm so excited. And they'll launch that in the fall. So it's a challenge right now. It's not equitable. People are saying, there's a data science versus calculus cat fight that I stay out of. I love all math and whatever, right? So it is. Y'all saw, I don't know if you saw the cat fight, I watch soap operas, so I'm here for it, right? But yeah. But I think it's by equipping the teachers and by helping them understand how they can use technology, how can they do data, what are some interesting projects, how can you engage students, and co-developing that between, at least our stance would be co-developing that between the AUC along with the teachers. And then the third component is industry. So a lot of jobs now, students can get tech jobs out of high school, right? The blue-collar STEM, skilled technical workforce. They don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. So how can we think about the knowledge, skills, and ability that industry is expecting of people in the workforce or people coming into the workforce that's data technology driven, and then how do we map that back into K-12 and maybe also into higher education? So that's how I'm thinking about it, if that makes sense. And I'll be at Morgan State next Friday at a conference, and I can send the information if you want to come. It's free. They have food too. Some AI and health.
That's good.
AI and health.
So kind of in line with what Dr. Washington's saying, equipping teachers. So Jarvis Givens, I'm not sure if folks know who that is. He just wrote a book on fugitive pedagogies. So I feel there's fracture when we think that schools are ever going to do what we need them to do. And so I think when you look at his analysis of Carter G. Woodson, I think we should be equipping teachers to break rules because we know that these systems are not going to look out for us. And so I think one way that I've tried with our lab is, we have to work with young people and we have to do a service project every month. And the students get to decide that. And so I would say in the work that you do, how can you get teachers to be more confident about what we see historically through examples? So teachers were literally going to be killed for trying to learn to read when these common schools were around. And so I think when we really take that history seriously and understand the privileges that we have, and so I feel guilty when I get paid out for a grant, and I say to my lab, there's this common lie we all tell ourselves. We will, get money and then pass by a person experiencing housing insecurity and lie to them. And so I think a lot of us are still dealing with our own internal contradictions. And I think when we start to work through that, I wouldn't expect a teacher to take on the additional work of trying to change the curriculum, trying to fight legislation. But I think supporting them and being more confident in learning history and saying, how can we become these people? How can we become our ancestors? And I think Jarvis does it's such a good read. Have y'all read that? It just makes you want to keep reading. So I would say if you read Fugitive Pedagogies, he just talks about what Carter G. Woodson did, and I think it's an example that I think we should all follow. The second thing I would say to the statistics and data science, Bob Moses' 5-step plan, starting with the concrete experience. I think teachers, that's really adaptable across all spaces, and stats comes up in so many ways. Even in geometry, you can think about statistics. And so, I would point to those two resources to have teachers think about, how can we all become more confident, more radical? Because, this money and these systems we like nice things, but it's not going to save and support the people that we see struggling. And I'm reminded when I go home to my family that how privileged am I to get to go to work and do these things? And so it's just a reminder of the ancestral work. And then I think the algebra project, so everyone has algebra projects in their cities. I'm part of the Atlanta Algebra Project, and I think just finding out your chapter, and there's someone waiting, a youth literacy worker waiting to support those teachers. We can't find enough work to do. So I would say if you find a local algebra project chapter, it'd definitely help you out.
Hello, this question is for Dr. Alexander. Monica Miles. Monica Miles, currently I'm a visiting assistant professor at Teachers College. I am going to be on the tenure track at the University of Buffalo, so I'm a proud Buffalonian. Thank you. And so this question is, I'm going to be stepping into this space. So I'm a proud Buffalonian. I've been home. I've been doing a lot of community activism work, right? So I'm going to city council meetings, I'm advocating for trees, and I'm talking about what's going on in Black Buffalo, right? And so we've gone through a lot from just COVID to the massacre and then the deadly blizzard, right? So a lot has happened to these children in just 1 year in just their communities and families, right? And so being on the front line of that, now I'm stepping into this space that I'm gonna be the first Black faculty member from Buffalo, right? And so Black Buffalo is looking at me like, should we trust them? They're asking me these questions, right? And the institution is looking at me like, can we crack the code and get inside of Black Buffalo? And I find myself in this conundrum, right? Of people are looking at me to gain entry both ways, and I have not figured out how to rectify that pressure. And then I'm also concerned about the pet to threat, where I'm really cute in the beginning, right? It's really cute that you write these op-eds. But at some point, right, at some point there is a risk, and I have not figured out how to, what are things I should be aware of as I continue this journey while still leaning into my passion and my purpose, while still being involved heavily in the community. And I just feel like your work is really speaking to that. You're doing it, but I just don't have the secret sauce on, like, as I'm stepping into this, what advice could you provide?
I'll be lost most of the time. But we just figure it out. Derek Bell, I'll talk about. He quit Harvard because they wouldn't hire a black woman. How many of us are willing to quit our jobs for our principles? So I want to be more like that. I'm not there yet. And so to your question, I think is we just are learning every day. And I think as we gain more power, you figuring it out. I do a lot of collaborative work with students. And so I feel like more like a facilitator where we sit in circles, we make decisions together. They see the budgets for our grants. So I don't need to hide that from students. I'm like, hey guys, this is how much money we have. Thank you for all the money. How should we spend it and what should we do with it? And we find community partners. And I think that keeps me confident that like I'm not doing it alone. And then young people are smart and they're ready. And they're a little bit more like, oh, Dr. Alexander, can we do this? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. Let me check. But yes, we can. And I think true collaboration is really, I don't know. I feel like early in grad school, I wanted to be like in the top journals, in the top school. And I was like, I just want to be like these white people that I don't really like. And I think, sorry, but that's how I feel. And then I made this commitment when I left a white institution that I would never work at a white institution again. I said, if I'm gonna be stressed, it's gonna be around my own people. And we still be stressed. But that was a move that I said, you know, I was teaching teachers in California, and I feel like I was working with white teachers trying to convince them that black kids weren't bad. I think I said that. And I just felt empty going home at night. And so now, same issues institutionally, but I have students that look like me, we have similar experiences, and I feel a little bit more confident to like step into this. So I just feel like I've been at Morehouse for 6 years. It's a constant growing process. And so I just be like, keep the faith, and you can't build this stuff overnight, but specifically to your question about that balance, my chair is one of my biggest supporters. And so when I make a mistake, I text him like I did something wrong. And I think having that person in the admin who you can sort of be like, oh, I did this, or you about to hear about this, it keeps things, you feel like you got someone that has your back. And so I would say maybe find someone at your new institution that you trust, or a couple people, and then just keep them in your corner, you know, on text. And I think it's about confidence, really, because I think all of us want to be more like ancestral, but it's a lot of shiny things around that we struggle with, and that's okay, but I think we're trying to grow and learn into being these people, yeah.
Can I add to that? So back in 2005, I'm from Evansville, Indiana, which is in southwestern Indiana. So in 2005, I was in New York. I said, it's expensive, so I pulled up my 3 kids, and we went to the University of Evansville. And I actually bought a home. It was a few blocks away from my high school. So I was in that situation. University of Evansville, I think I was the first black in STEM, right? You could probably count the other black professors on maybe one hand, right? The whole lineage, right? So it was very predominantly white school. And so I like how you're thinking about it, so I think you'll be good, and that's really great advice. I'm not sure if I really thought about it beforehand, because I was so frazzled with kids, right? And tenure and stressed out. I did find that when I went back, like you're gonna go back home, you may go back to a new home. So the people I still saw the people who raised me, right? Because we have a very tight-knit black community there. We have an Evansville African American Museum, which I'm on the board of. So I'm very still connected, but I came back to a different community, and because I have been gone for a while. So expect to go back to a different community that you will go back to in Black Buffalo, and then also be open, you know, on both ends, right? And don't stress yourself too thin, because a lot of people will know you, both on the community side and the university side, and your community will advocate for you. So if you say, I need to do this so I'm successful, they want you to be successful for them. And for me, that was an empowering position to be in, that it wasn't just me going through this. I had a whole community of people right here in my backyard who kind of have my back on things, right? And then the last thing I'll say is, if you could by chance look up Scott Williams. Does that name ring a bell in Black Buffalo? Okay, so he started the MAD web pages. MAD is an acronym that stands for Mathematicians of the African Diaspora. created this whole website where he talks about all black mathematicians. You know why he did it? He does topology, right? And very nice. He's an elder in the field. We all bow down to him. He's fantastic. He was at he was at University of Buffalo, or is it SUNY? I get the two confused. SUNY Buffalo. But look him up, Scott Williams. If you don't find him here, I can find him for you. But he'd be a great person to sit down and just talk to and meet. But you're thinking in the right direction. So I think you'll have a great time.
Just a piece of information, his mom was the first person to get a math degree in the area. So just mention that when you talk to him. In Maine.
Yeah, she just got like an award in Maine, so you got to pop that in there too. Yeah.
So this was an absolutely amazing, invigorating, and absolutely deeply informative set of keynotes. I want to thank you both again. And with that, we will see you all tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. to begin our workshops.